that way? Or is he a Sammy Davis Jr.? Was he converted down the road? See, what they don't know is that there are Ethiopian Jews that go back all the way back to Solomon. Because you ought to know, you ought to remember, the Queen of Sheba, who was the queen of Ethiopia and Egypt, heard about this great wise man named Solomon, and she traveled to Jerusalem to meet Solomon. And there, they consummated that relationship and that friendship. And she became pregnant and had a son by the name of Menelik. When Menelik was 22 years old, he wanted to meet his father. And so he traveled from Ethiopia to meet his father Solomon and spent 3 years there learning the Hebrew laws. And he looked so much like his father that the priests around Solomon's temple said, "Look, Solomon, you got to send this boy home because we see him and we think he's you and we don't want this confusion anymore. So please send him back to Ethiopia." And Solomon said, "All right, but I tell you what, if I send him back, your eldest son, each one of your eldest son will have to go with him, plus 1,000 men." And all those priests, their eldest son, and 1,000 men went back with Menelik to Ethiopia. And to this day, there is a huge, let me tell you, a huge Ethiopian Jewish population in Ethiopia, in Africa, to this day.
I'm going to look that up when I go home.
And then they'll tell you, some preacher will come to this text and they'll say, well, we're not sure if he's a Nubian Ethiopian. They'll say, well, there's uncertainty what he is. And I would bring your attention to your bulletin today. In the front cover, you see, a picture. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words. Here is Rembrandt, the great Renaissance painting this scene of Philip baptizing the Ethiopian. What do you see? In churches throughout the world, in Italy, in Ethiopia, in Africa, there's this scene on stained glass windows and on canvas of the Ethiopian being baptized by Philip. And everywhere you look, the Ethiopian is a Nubian black man. But still to this day, preachers will stand in pulpits, scholars would stand in universities and say, we're not sure whether this Ethiopian was a Nubian black man. He's called the Ethiopian Eunuch. Well, there's uncertainty of what he was. Maybe Ethiopian Eunuch was his position. No, eunuch and treasurer was his position. He's called the Ethiopian Eunuch because that's what he was. Or they say, well, it doesn't matter what he is, church. They'll say, God loves everyone. God is not prejudiced. Well, we know God isn't prejudiced, but we're not sure if you, the reader, you, the preacher, you, the scholar, is not prejudiced, because it says, Pow, the Ethiopian eunuch. How could this man from Ethiopia be reading Greek? And church, we need to understand something. Back in those days, they didn't have computers. They didn't have copy machines. They didn't have Xerox. If you wanted the Old Testament book of Isaiah. If you wanted a copy of this, somebody or a group of people would have to write and copy it and translate it by hand. And when Greek is written and when it was translated by hand, it took them months.